Hello and welcome to BOT. Nidal, Lakshit, Suman, and Manthan meet here to talk about the bits of tech as it relates to digital transformation. Tune in and enjoy.
That's good.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We got locked into a room today, and that is the virtual room. Why I'm talking about a lock is my weak attempt at humor um, to say that we are going to talk about a lot of locks today. Um, when you chain up locks a lot, it becomes governance, right? I think that's what I'm trying to get at. So if there was one lock on the door, then just a lock. If there were two doors with two locks on it, then it is safety. If it was a vault, then there is something really worth which needs to be secured, right? Um, the same way, data has become as pricey and as much as an asset like anything else, and in some cases even higher than gold, right? As we know it today. And that's why putting a lock on that data has become increasingly important. Not because there are laws, that is obviously a place where we can go and check compliance and or say that hey we are compliant, but the fact that data in itself has evolved in a way that you could play with data and change a person's life literally. So we are out of that Netflix world now where data was changed in a certain series to then manipulate the outcome of a person's choice, right? We are actually in that world now, which is very mind boggling to me when I think of it, that somebody out there for sure has my government ID and everything else, and they could use it to do certain things, and I will have to go and then correct it all. That prompts us to talk about data governance as a topic today, right? And how outside of laws it has become important to not only ensure that yes, I am GDPR compliant or I'm CCPA compliant or this country compliance or this state compliant, but more than anything else, how is it that when I'm giving all my data to an organization, which is a lot of organizations now, right? Because everything is online, that they will store my identity as an identity. I have a few very interesting ideas about how data governance can be a non-topic eventually. And I think we're getting there, but we'll first hear what you'll have to say and then maybe I'll share my thoughts again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for opening this up, Manthan. I think a lot to be unpacked here. A term that gets used a lot in today's consulting firms, conversations, a lot of service providers bringing in data governance as an added service offering, and especially because it's very relevant, right? Continues to be relevant, hasn't been like the first year. 2024 is not the first time some people started using governance, for sure, but it continues to evolve. But I would probably like take a step back and just like talk about some very basic um, you know things that define data governance, especially for those who are listening in who are probably not very familiar with this concept, right? So there's a few aspects of data that gets addressed via data governance, which is data availability, the usability, integrity, and security. And these are just a few. There could be more aspects of it. Let's talk about each of these just to break it down. How easily data becomes available, and on the other side of the same spectrum, how difficult it becomes to to access that same data, right? So there's actually two spectrums of this, and I'll dive a bit deeper into that aspect. um, on one side, you have a very strict data governance process where it is very difficult for different sets of users to access data. Whereas on the other side of the same spectrum, you have data democratization, which talks about having data accessibility for everyone in the organization, right, at your fingertips. And that's where concepts like self-service analytics, have people do their own analysis by using drag and drop, easy user interface visualization, data visualization, dashboards, create your own reports, with access to data at your fingertips. So there's two aspects of this. Now, what we have seen generally is that depending on the industry, depending on this, the amount of sensitivity of that data that is accessible for organizations, users, or end users, or even to general public, it varies. Some organizations tend to have, or some industries tend to have data more accessible for everyone, whereas in some other organizations, in finance or in banking or in other sensitive industries like health. We talked about health analytics, health data, right? Those are instances where you need to have more strict locks in place, like Manthan was saying, the analogy of locks, for in order for people to qualify before they get access to that data, right? So that's talking about the data availability aspect of it. The data usability aspect talks about, is it in good usable format? Is it in in a structure that is ready to be consumed or ready to be um, put into those models or those um, processes that make that data available for reporting or for other downstream purposes. Then data integrity talks about aspects like quality, about whether that data was collected via consent, and some of those other aspects. And then lastly, data security, which we have touched upon several times before in our previous conversations as well, right? We've talked about fraud analytics. We've talked about those type of topics where data security is like a key aspect. But yeah, essentially these are all like different aspects that we will be like diving into deeper today, and what defines a good data governance mechanism. I'll take a pause here for any thoughts.
Just a thing that came to my mind as an end user is, right, when you type on a search engine the word data, and the number of terminologies that end up being the suffix of it are mind-boggling. Like at times, it just sounds a lot of words to me, a lot of English, but no real meat, right? Of course, everything that you said has an essence to it, and it is the way that you'd understand the spectrum of data, which is obviously needed and is there. But I think it has also been over-engineered theoretically so much that the entire topic sounds overwhelming. So that's also an aspect which I just wanted to bring, that as soon as you type data governance or whatever, and if you were in an interview, somebody asked, hey, what is data democratization versus data security versus governance? And I'm like, dude, it's all the same thing, right? So like it just gets too like, I think the wires are so intertwined that you're literally picking up a strand and saying that, hey, this is this. We may not in all situations need to be um, in real life. I'm saying that we may not have to be so specific in the work, the kind of work that we do. So this what I'm trying to say to the listeners here is that yes, there are a lot of terminologies revolving around data security and governance, but it's okay to not know it all. You can always refer a few things here and there, but understanding the essence of what data governance is more important than the terminologies that are just annoying more than anything else. Over to you, Lakshit. Or Nidal, if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think you addressed that, fun part about like any term, be it any term in our industry, right? We
Yeah,
have overusage of that term. We have like different entities using that term in different context. Like talk about, I won't derail off this topic like too much, but just talk about data analyst. Like what does a data
yeah,
analyst do at like four different organizations, four entirely different things, right? So that's where like, in theory it's something, in practice it becomes completely something else, which is why we are
right.
having these conversations, because I'm sure all of us will have different perspectives, different experiences in even
Mhm.
how our respective organizations view data governance as how important it is on a scale of 1 to 5, and what are the actual practices that you bring in, right? And that's where we have different differences. There'll always be differences there, and it
Yeah,
is
totally.
definitely interesting to unpack. But
Yeah.
yeah, curious to hear more.
Nice one, folks. So, where I'll start today. As Manthan rightly mentioned, about data sovereignty many prefixes, so many suffixes being to assigned to data. Let's start something with very fundamental, something that we learned back maybe back in a school, college. I don't remember. We used to have this chart. I remember something called as data, information, knowledge. Let's define data. What data really means. Data, as far as I recall, I don't recall that exact chart. Is any data to me is the building block for any information or knowledge. Put simply, it is any meaningful piece of information about a user, an entity, or a subject that can help us derive more information and knowledge about that subject. Now, if we can, so data or raw data, one single pointer in itself may not be as critical, but when combined with other relevant information, associated information, it can be very powerful. It can tell you about a person's medical history. It can talk about a person's financial history. It can talk about an individual's behavioral aspects. It can forecast, and I mean, forecasting tools are another topic for another day, but it can keep on delivering more and more information about the person. And if you keep chaining, you keep linking one point to another, you keep connecting the dots, you can practically learn everything and anything there is to know about a person, which is why it becomes critical and important to protect certain data in a day and age where we are living, where data is exploding practically billions of gigabytes, streaming billions of gigabytes in a day. uh, and we are voluntarily or involuntarily, leaving our digital footprints across everything: social media, our searches, our exploration, our content consumption. Everywhere that we consuming anything on the internet, we are somewhere or the other leaving our digital footprint. And so it becomes the prerogative of the folks who are serving us that content. I wouldn't call it publisher, advertiser. I don't want to use complicated terms, but but the providers of the content, but the providers of the platform where we are consuming the content, it becomes their responsibility and accountability to ensure that everything that we do is being done in a safe and trustful environment, that we consume the content knowing that this will not result in our data being misused for anything other than what we intended for it to be. It is okay to also, sometimes check the box for marketing, because we of course want to know what more is there in the market. We would like, if we have certain interest, we would also always like to be updated about a certain product. If we are into fashion industry, we always want to know what's the new trend, what's the new fad that's going on. We want to keep updated, we want to stay trendy, so it's important to remain close to the marketing updates. Which is why, while data governance of course is important to ensure that the the sanctity of the user or the sanctity of the subject is maintained, it also behaves like a key competitive advantage. If you an organization that respects their data, that respects their user privacy, that respects this, policies in order to ensure that data controls are put in place, can also foster a very strong data driven culture, wherein they can use that as a competitive advantage. Like, they can personalize the content for their users, they can reach out to the users at the right time, they can use, make sure that they are always updated, they are giving them what the users ask of them. So in a market where everybody's competitive, they're trying to eat into each other's market share. uh, Good data and good data governance and get data driven culture uh, can provide you with the marketing and the competitive edge and the advantage that you need in order to get in front of your customer at the right time, at the right place, at the right moment, essentially.
That's really cool. When we decided on this topic, right, data governance, the first thing that came to my mind, like obviously data governance in terms of the data, and while we are working, we will have numerous examples of how it should be used, how should we mask customers' data, and blah blah blah. But the most fundamental thing that I can tell you out of personal experience is that we have to share our Aadhaar card or a PAN card over a WhatsApp to, let's say, a delivery person, let's say, to actually get that product delivered to us. How safe is that? So obviously, in a corporate function, we know, okay, we would be having XYZ rules and regulations to be followed as per GDPR, and we can do that. But even in normal working scenario, we are doing that. So if Aadhaar cards are flying around so easily, I don't know where does um, data governance come into picture in our country generally. Um, so that was just a thing that I thought about earlier. On the other hand, in my experience, we while working on Adobe AEP platform, Adobe Experience platform, they have a very wonderful thing which is dual policy, and we at numerous levels while we are let's say stitching 10 data sources, we have a mechanism to enforce data labels, out of which we have PII, which is sensitive information, as Lakshit mentioned, right? Anything in a combination of information, if that can be utilized to identify as any person, it is very critical, which could be used incorrectly. So all of that is taken care of in the platform. And I'm sure there are many CDPs out there, many platforms which will be solving these problems. But the best part is that people are now taking it so seriously because they know that their company would face a lot of loss if this basics is not taken care of, right? So that's the wonderful part of it in terms of, as all of us agree where we are heading at.
And I took a second to unmute. That's fantastic. I just um first for people who are, because I am assuming that we have a lot of international audience, that I'm giving this disclaimer. So you can drop a comment if you are an international audience listening to us. Aadhaar card is the national identification number equivalent for India. So what Suman is stating is specific to India and specific to an experience that happened, not generalized everywhere. That is just a disclaimer and a piece of information I wanted to give around, right? But like it's like in some places, in some parts of the world, it could be as obvious as, sorry, Lakshit, go for it.
I'm just saying, Manthan playing the right data steward by putting in a disclaimer as a data governance policy right there. Good example.
This is how you do data governance, right? Um, I have so many thoughts right now, and some of those thoughts are also pissing me because I've been through those. It's pissing me off right now. I'll tell you what is precisely pissing me right now. I've heard people do data governance and get into meeting rooms where they were supposed to present to us as a business as to what data governance is, and they start their first slide says data governance is an art and not a science, and I'm like, sure. So, mentally, that's the part where anybody ever, if they say that statement, I'm almost always off that train right then mentally. Like in all honesty, in my obnoxious self, which is not the right thing to do, but I lose respect very quickly. Uh, it's difficult to win me after you've ever said that statement, right? Um, if you were to tell anybody why that is, then somebody would want to hear it out, right? But as soon as you say it's an art, it's not a science, you're basically saying that you don't know what the boundaries are or you're not able to define it. Why I'm saying this is because data governance has ended up blurring lines in a way that the governmental law, which is horizontal, right, applies in a certain way that everybody wants to comply with, right? That horizontal law was built thinking that there are verticals in place. To Nidal's earlier comment, it is an assumption that the job of a data analyst is to analyze data, right? But that is not nowhere near to what a data analyst would end up doing, right? It could just be a little part of what they do. So then to say that, hey, data governance, when they've applied it horizontally, to say that you need to have roles in your organization and clearly define boundaries as to who will access what and why, and have a rationale which conforms to, let's say, the GDPR, right? That sounds like a very simple statement. Here is the job role, here is the profile of that person. So they get access to only this data from a job role point of view. It sounds so simple, but it's never like that. An analyst would end up reporting to a VP or end up manipulating the data that the VP is looking at, and they would need to have access to that level of data. For example, revenue of a company, right? If they don't do that, then who will? So I think when these laws are made, they are not made custom to the rules that a person would have. But ironically, these laws mandate that data governance should be role wise, right? So when you come in a scenario like this, I would obviously rules respect, still rules respect for somebody who says it's an art, not a science. But after enough experience, I've realized that this is what they mean, right? It's just that they may not have the grit to say it this way. So they're just saying that, hey, we're getting there, right? So that's one aspect of it. But in all reality, on ground today, you need roles to be defined very clearly in your organization, and very clearly those roles should conform to certain profiles, meaning that here are the rank of people whom I would consider as analyst profile, and these analysts, irrespective of their rank, these analyst profiles will have access to these many tools, hence these many data points, hence these many reports and these many views and these many people, right? That's the idea. If you were to draw this on an Excel sheet for an enterprise organization, it takes at least three VPs. And I don't mean three VPs combined. I mean, it takes at least three VPs to resign from their job, where the fourth VP comes in, and that they finally start with this in an enterprise organization. That's the hard reality today, right? I'm not saying that it always is the scenario, but generally, before you get to the end of data governance, there has been so many people cycles that what one started with as a vision and what one would end with would be very different. This is my take on the roles aspect of the data governance. Before I go on about my frustration and banter more, I'll listen to you all first.
So one of the biggest ironies about leadership is that they always want to stay in control. And one of the biggest aspects of data governance is proper delegation, meaning you can't make everybody happy. Being uncomfortable and being comfortably uncomfortable is one of the biggest aspects of data governance. You have to accept that there are policies in place, and these policies, as you mentioned, cannot be in gray. They have to be absolutely black and white, which means you request for a certain piece of information about a customer and the answer is no, then you accept it and you move on. You do not request for it further. You do not pressurize the other person to request for it further. You accept your laws, you accept your policies, respect the person who's created those policies, and you move on. The reason why a lot of the times these data governance policies fall into limbo is when people realize something called as RBAC. The same thing that Manthan was mentioning, role-based access controls. And when they realize that if an RBAC is placed in, is put into place and put into place affirmatively, they will not have access to all of the data, which they should not have access to in the first place. Ethically, by code of conduct, by legal policies, by moral policies, by all sorts of grounds. That, in my opinion, is the biggest hindrance to data governance. So every time we talk about such large transformational changes with in our consulting world, when we talk about such large transformational projects that we undertake and we discuss with the clients about data governance, very rare that we're starting from scratch. There, in most cases, there are policies already in place. We are generally called in order to maybe audit them, see through if there are gaps in the policies, and help them improve them. Those are typically the use cases. Building it from scratch takes years. If I mean, could take very well years. You have to have so many certifications, SOC 2 certifications, CCPA compliance, GDPR compliance, and whatnots. Many legal compliance and certifications that need to be put in place for you to even get started off the ground. But once you put those in place, maintenance is a different beast altogether. Uh, in my experience, what I've come to realize, and the way I bifurcated, and structurally the way I bifurcated is a broad spectrum of people, process, and technologies. You need a synergy between all of these three in order to create a holistic data governance framework for your organization. What do I mean by people? Different labels. You can talk about data stewards, data chief data officer, data privacy officers, security, and whatnots. Broadly speaking, again, what it will come down to are three typical roles. Sponsor. Sponsors meaning label it anyway, chief data officer or whatever. But sponsor meaning somebody who is willing to invest in the data collection itself. That yes, we do want certain types of data that needs to be collected. In order to collect their data, we will have to put in place certain process and policies to process that data and then take an output of it. Somebody who is driven by data driven culture would need to sponsor such projects so that there is at least a proposal that can be put in front of them that okay, in order for you to unlock a use case that brings value to your business, you will need some of these data points to be collected, and in order to collect these data points, here are some of the implementation tasks that your team will need to overtake. That sponsor or that decision maker or that final person, final say in the category, is what you need, a sponsor. Then comes the architects. Architects are the folks who will give you the yes, go, no go decision. Simple. While a sponsor may always say yes, he will always focus on the value that is being delivered by the solution. An architect will believe more in the feasibility of they will weigh the risk and rewards equation. They will say, okay, while it is good to implement this, what are the investments that we have to do? Is the reward worth the risk? Is it worth the investment? What if it's a negative ROI? So that ROI calculation is mostly done by the architect. They're responsible for the resources available in the organization, be it in terms of people, be it in terms of technology, be it in terms of the output that this new project will promise. So they are the ones who are responsible for weighing the risks and reward of the actual project or the policy that's now being put in place, so that they give the go no go decision to the sponsor. And then once the thing is done, a proposal is sent, sponsor says yes, let's go ahead, make this investment so that we can deliver value. Then comes the final person or the end user of that data. End user could be an analyst, could be a marketer, could be an operational person, could be your HR policies, could be your legal team, anybody who's the end user. That is where typically the RBAC controls come into place. uh, a marketing team doesn't really need information about company's finances, and likewise a company's financial person may not necessarily need all the information about the emails being sent out to your end users. And HR may not always need the information about the company's P&L statements. It's part of it. I could be wrong. I could be way off. I think they do have access to it. But just putting it out there that they may not need like the investments done in larger merger projects. So put simply, that it's important to put in place controls on what data is needed by whom, putting in controls that only the required data is available to the required teams. Data is potentially in good quality and provided in sufficient quantity so that they can make innovative solutions out of it, and to use that to the best of the capability to bring value to the business. A good data governance policy is one that will ensure that the data is used by the right teams to bring the right value to the business. As long as we can stay true to that objective, uh, a good data driven culture will continue to foster. And the questions that Manthan said, right, that it takes many VPs to make this decision, sounds simple what I'm saying, but it does take a lot of fight battles to win over the right people, to convince them that such policies, while will take time and in short term may you have to make a lot of changes internally. You will have to tell people that they can no longer access certain information without certain approvals. While it takes time, once put in place, does bring in a lot of structure into the organization and makes life easier for everybody else going forward. Yeah.
I think you spoke about a lot of the aspects, such as the complexity of a data governance program, right? It's not easy. You talked about the amount of hands involved, like the amount of different types of roles involved in like maintaining, making sure this happens, which is one of the reasons why organizations even rely on external parties for data governance, right? It's not just always in-house. Though in paper, teams, departments would have data governance processes documented, available for easy consumption. Everyone has access to that policy, right? But do people really follow it? Um, in order to enforce these types of structures, mechanisms, that's where a lot of organizations rely on external agencies, external service providers who come in with, either data governance as a service, or they provide some other type of service, but for that service the data collection and the data management involves best practices like data governance. So it's like an auxiliary add-on that they bring in along with the service that they deliver. So that is just like one of the examples where you rely on external parties, you rely on experts who for whom this is one of their KPIs. And when you say it's a KPI, this is something that they constantly measure, something that they always check that organizations are adhering to, which is where you have focus there, right? When it becomes just a policy, just like your laptop usage policy, it just becomes another checkbox that you cross when you join an organization. And when there's a violation, a serious violation, that policy comes back up. Otherwise, you all know how much we refer to it on a daily basis and adhere to it on a daily basis. With that being said, there's a few other contexts also from which you can look at data governance. Like, for example, Lakshit talked about the data collection aspect of things. And when you're collecting data, you could collect data first party, like, using your own data collection methods, or even platforms or tools that enable first party data collection, or you could have like third party, right? And a lot of these third party data services bring in compliance by giving data as a service and bringing some of these data governance processes as an additional value add. For example, Snowflake uses data as a service platform to bring in some of these additional um, let's say fail safes or these guidelines in place. um, the other thing I want to talk about, just like from my like day-to-day work, I work a lot on Google Analytics, the latest version, which is Google Analytics 4. There's a lot of examples for data governance within that individual tool or platform itself, such as you have the ability to customize the levels of accesses that someone can get. And for example, there's a certain level of access that does not give access to any cost data or revenue associated data that can be sensitive information. There are organizations where I have seen best practices such as any email that comes through, it's automatically flagged using AI. What is the security level, or the let's call it sensitivity level of the content, right? If it is like highly sensitive information, it gets flagged automatically. Or in some other organizations, you have to like manually select it based on like your interpretation and adhering to a matrix that has been defined within the organization. Like, if it is these data coming from these sources, these are to be considered as highly sensitive, and you have to flag it in when you're sending. And generally you're asked to refrain from like sending it as email attachments, etc., which is not encrypted, that people cannot access with a can access without a password and such. So these are just like some examples of how organizations put in these types of like fail safes in place. Organizations can make it very easy for people to access data. Again, alluding to one of the examples that Lakshit shared, you can have a data governance process in place where if you are a certain level in an organization, like you are a VP, you get access to pretty much everything. But there is another sort of architecture which is called the zero trust architecture. A lot of you are probably like, I see Manthan nodding your head. You've probably heard about it earlier than I did because you've been in the tech or in that space for a while, right? It was, I think it got introduced in like early 2010s, etc., but became more prominent like in the recent past as well, because it essentially talks about, do not trust any user or device by default, because all of that can be replicated by someone else pretending to be that person or that device, right? So always continue to verify like each access request, the user, the device, even the context, additional details like IP or whatever, right? And this essentially facilitates least privilege access, which also means that you get access to whatever you require, you really require. Like, there's like more stringent focus on, like, do you actually need access to anything beyond a certain level, right? So basically that type of architecture, which has led to also more like platforms having like multi-factor authentication and different other methods for verifying users, trust tokens and so on, right? So just talking about, like, yeah, I'll take a pause. I think, Manthan, you have some, probably some interesting thoughts to add. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, you've gone into interesting tangents there, right? So just to add some data suffix terminologies to what you're saying, one is data security aspect, the other is data governance aspect, which we're talking about, and the third is data access aspect, right? If I were to draw a box around each, right, data security is the first box, right? Then it is the data access, and then it is the data governance. That's how I would draw my boxes, right? I'm not saying this is the true theory, but that's how I would draw it. The reason being that I could have access to a data, right? Governance begins at what I end up doing with it. Of course, I so it is not only this aspect, it obviously starts at I should not have access to revenue metric, for example, right? But just in case, because I'm an analyst, I had access to it. What I end up, what I could end up doing with it is more troublesome, right? That's why the response goes back to the first thing. But Nidal, I'll let you finish your thoughts. I'm just saying that there are like a certain boxes within box within a box which we need to like open one at a time and then say that, hey, this is this, but this is this, but this got affected. It's literally like that. So I'm just agreeing to you in my own ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a lot to be talked about there. The
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
aspect of like how organizations deal with it. Like you talked about, okay, um, I already have access, so maybe there's not so stringent restrictions there, but what do I do next with it? What is, for example, the data retention, right? How long do I have access to something for? There are different controls that can be brought into the place by using a system, which means that, okay, you get temporary access to something within a certain period of time, and you don't need access anymore, right? Which is also where we have organizations have, as part of their security policies, a frequent validation of, do all of these users continue to require access, after a certain period of months, they continue to check whether, do you still need access to this? If not, if you don't respond, you lose access. If you say no, you lose access. Or if it is predetermined using some other variables, you automatically lose access, right? There are systems in place that put all of these into picture. Different organizations do it differently. Different organizations have different levels of importance for data governance. If you see an organization in the European Union, chances are high that you're probably having more nightmares about data governance as compared to others in other different regions. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, we've all seen like different takes of how people perceive and act upon it.
Wow, absolutely. I had 5 points on my mind, and I think 3 to 4 of them have already been discussed. So I think I just have one experience to share, and that would be while working on data, right? So one, we have spoken about access, and the other part is that how what we actually do of that data. So generally, working in the consulting company, we have clients' data. In my experience, let's say banking as an example, we will get the data masked. I mean, there's no question asked there, right? But for other domains or industries, that it can be that the data is not masked. So what we do is a thorough data pre-processing in terms of anything that any model that we want to build, and then when it is shared back to the client, the data is masked because they want to, let's say, share that data elsewhere. So these are the processes, even for very small and niche companies uh, or clients that we work with, and that we discuss it beforehand. So I think these minute details make a lot of difference in my experience. And I think we've never faced issue in terms of having customers' data, and that it in my experience, and that it was used incorrectly somewhere. So that's the thing. Um, the other interesting part in terms of data governance is that I have been thinking about is the access of information that people have, right, these days, especially with AI coming into the picture and what people can do with leveraging AI, right? So there needs to be strong data governance because everybody now has access to the internet and they have data, numerous amount of data, images or whatever at their disposal. So that should be regulated, in my understanding, more stringently. So that's the thought that I had.
Thanks, Suman. Uh, we've talked a lot about data governance policies, talked about a lot of techniques, a lot of uh, you know places and how it is done. I'd like to take this moment to talk about some of examples that I follow, like our organization, what it does, because I firmly believe that data governance at the end of the day is an each individual's responsibility. It boils down to the fact that data governance has to, at the end of the day, it's all about people enablement and people accountability, how they're using it and how responsibly are they using it. So we do have these all year around or sometimes quarterly or 6 months enablement processes, uh, mandatory trainings that what type of data can be considered as sensitive, as confidential, as need to know kind of scenario. So that's the kind of data cataloging information that's ingrained in each and in each employee, so that they understand the sensitivity of the vertical or the industry that they're dealing in, and what can be shared outside the organization and what cannot be. That's the end game. In so many finance verticals, I've seen that they can't even send files across over certain SFTP or HTTPS protocols because the IPs are not whitelisted. They can always get whitelisted approvals, but then you have to build a case, get approvals, explain to the IT teams, which brings us to the question that it's a need to know sort of a situation where the IT approves a use case for specifically in order to share their data outside of their organization to a responsible organization. Uh, in our own case, every time I send out an email and I try to share some file outside of my organization, so for example, we create a Google Sheet and we want to make a collaborative document because these are over the web softwares, all of Google Suites, Google Office. These are collaborative in nature, and we want to work with the client on something. It will ask me, what kind of data are we sending out? Does this need to know? Is this confidential? Do we have an NDA agreement with the customer? The answer most often is yes. This gives those enablement and training sessions give me the confidence in being able to share the right amount of and the right set of data with the customer, knowing what I can and cannot share. In one of my primary projects that I personally work on are the enhanced conversions and the enhanced conversion for leads, where we have all of these conversations about PII data being sent over the web and files on a day in and day out basis. And we keep consulting our clients on what can be shared, how it can be masked in an SHA, say 256 format, to ensure it's a one-way encryption and it is not readable. That only systems that are designed to read it can read it and do a hash to hash matching. We talk about how encryptions are different from hashing, masking, and everything. So, put simply, people enablement is also a very key aspect of data governance. You keep enabling your people. It may sound boring, but eventually it does give you the confidence and the belief and the knowledge that your company and your organization has about their data governance policies gives you the confidence to enforce those policies yourself and reduce the chances for any sort of breaches.
Interesting thoughts. Um, while talking about data governance, I think I have a little bit of contradiction left in me, so I might as well just record it so that it's there on YouTube, so that we can go back to it and have our own discussions later. I think it is a people problem which can be solved using tech. I don't think that it is a people problem that can be solved using people. For example, if I'm a bank employee, I know that account numbers are in a certain format, right? With that certain format, I have the access to the query service of that bank. Now I'm able to query the account number of my relative. Okay, which obviously that query would be logged somewhere in the bank, knowing that yes, I queried it. But if my whole job is to query, then it is very less likely, despite all the data governance, that I will be questioned for it. And even if I do get questioned, I will have a reason of why I access that particular account balance, right? Or that I could just run like 10 different queries with random numbers, and one of this could be my relative's number, and now I know their bank account, right? So it is a people problem that can only be solved with tech, or a combination of both, which we are miserably failing at today. That's why the laws had to be recently introduced, right? Otherwise, there were no need of laws. If it could be solved with people, we were good. But we've made a huge mess out of the system that was given in our hands. And when I say our, I mean people using technology, right? That's the spectrum I'm talking about. That's why we need a tech. What my brightest idea of our discussion today is that we need a tool, one single tool, which enforces data governance, right? Meaning that, let's say in India as a territory, if you want to be data compliant, here is a tool we have, data governance compliant or data compliant or whatever policies compliant. Here is a tool we have created. Okay, it's a far-fetched idea, but here is a tool we have created which will rate you out of 10, and that is how much compliant you are at any given point of time. This tool will do regular checks on your software systems, etc., etc. Here is the input it needs, and now we know the number, and that can be a public number. Like how we are able to search the number of shares available in public for a company, the same way we should be able to search how compliant that company is in terms of data governance and or privacy and or security, like all those data suffix terminologies, whichever is applicable, however it is applicable. One can start small and do it, but it cannot be a privately owned initiative. It has to be enforced at a horizontal level. So at a federal level, if it was implemented, then we could possibly get to that ideal state of getting to the road of actual governance, right? And there is obviously a lot of ifs and buts in my ideal world there, but that's how I would essentially solve it. It's just some fun thoughts I have. So yeah, that's the whole conversation today. I guess we are at time. We do have to close this off, but this needs at least 10 more iterations for us to talk about data governance and come up with more ideas. Maybe if I form a company, disclaimer, I will not give you any of you a credit or stake in that. So just saying I'll form a company tomorrow for data governance.
Expecting nothing
Okay.
less from you.
Okay. All right, folks. It was a good one. You will have a good time ahead. Bye bye.
Goodbye, everyone.